Hello there, I'm the Sleepy Chemist and I'll be here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? You lie upon the quiet shore of night, blankets pulled to your chin like a low tide of warmth, and only now do you hear the simplest, oldest lullaby, the rise and slow fall of your own breathing. All day your lungs have laboured without applause, moving invisible tides in and out, but here, between lamplight and darkness, each inhalation widens softly, as though the muscles between your ribs have learned the cadence of moonlight itself. Cool air grazes your nostrils, drifts along the back of the throat and settles in the velvet gloom of the chest. You picture that journey, an unseen caravan guided only by tiny shifts of pressure, until it arrives in the silent cathedral of the lungs. There, 10 million alveolar lanterns unfurl, waiting to catch the incoming breeze. The first wave lands, and in the hush that follows you feel your pulse answer, a faint drum wrapped in cloth, promising that every story of life begins with a single, gentle breath. Inside that cathedral the walls are delicate as soap film, yet strong enough to uphold the oldest pact on earth. Oxygen slips across the alveolar membrane the way a secret passes between friends, joining the crimson flood of blood cells waiting below. Each red cell is a tiny craft sheathed in hemoglobin, iron-rich sails that redden when oxygen climbs aboard, turning murky maroon to banner-bright scarlet. Almost at once, the current ferries those boats through the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium, and onward, a silent flotilla of colour. You do not steer it. Your heart keeps rhythm like a steady drummer in the bow, pulsing oxygen-rich blood along arteries that branch and rebranch like deltas until they reach the smallest villages of flesh. Somewhere behind your sternum an entire river system is shimmering with new light, all because you drew one unhurried breath. And what of the travellers themselves? Those two pale atoms bound as O2. They are ancient storytellers. Some were forged in the cores of massive stars that died before our sun was born, flung into space on supernova winds. Others slipped from volcanic vents when the young Earth exhaled steam. For half the planet's history there was almost none to breathe. Seas simmered with iron, skies glowed copper, and cells survived on gentler chemistries. Then cyanobacteria learned to split water with sunlight, releasing oxygen as a shimmering byproduct. The air gradually cleared, iron fell as banded stone, animals began in slow, dreamlike waves to swim, crawl, and stand. Each time you inhale, you borrow molecules from that saga, inheriting 2 billion years of photosynthetic hope. Your diaphragm settles again, slow as an anchor into sand, and a fresh tide rolls inward. In drowsy imagination you trace the path, trachea to bronchi to bronchioles, a branching arbour carved in air until it ends in clusters of alveolar blossoms. Surgeons call this arborization. Poets might call it an inward forest. If you could unfurl every alveolus, the tissue would cover a tennis court, an entire field folded within the chest, exchanging gases in absolute silence. The image comforts you. Even when thoughts scatter like birds at dusk, a quiet geometry under the breastbone remains unbroken, faithful as tide to moon. Yet the air you draw is not pure ardour. Only 1 breath in 5 is oxygen. The rest is mostly nitrogen, an unassuming chaperone that tempers every reaction. Nitrogen dilutes the zeal of oxygen the way twilight softens daylight, preventing kitchen stove and woodland glade alike from blooming into sudden flame. Even so, oxygen stays eager, touch bare steel to damp air and rust blossoms, slice an apple and white flesh browns within minutes. Inside you, though, enzymes and antioxidants tame that appetite, guiding oxygen toward productive fires instead of ruinous sparks. In this way, your body becomes both hearth and shepherd, tending a slow chemistry that glows but does not burn. Listen to the muffled percussion in your ears. Lub-dub, lub-dub. Each beat is a piston pushing oxygen-laden blood through arterial boulevards, across capillary bridges, and back along venous avenues. At rest, the round trip from lung to fingertip lasts perhaps 15 heartbeats. During a sprint, the tempo doubles, and oxygen floods muscles like wind in a sail. Tonight there is no race, only the measured drift of darkness. Still, the heart keeps watch, a lighthouse revolving above the tides of sleep. It may surprise you that this generous gas can also wound. To many microbes, oxygen is poison, shattering fragile proteins the instant it touches them. Early life thrived where oxygen was absent. When the gas finally flooded the seas, most perished, and only the clever learned new defences. From the tallest mountain to the deepest lung, from the outer atmosphere to the tiniest flame, oxygen holds its role with grace. You feel this presence now not just in the breath that moves through you, but in the balance it strikes, everywhere. Too little, and life falters. Too much, and it combusts. But just enough, and it hums. It sings. Somewhere far from your bed, under the aurora where solar winds meet air, oxygen atoms glow in shades of green and crimson. The lights ripple. You're not watching them now, but the memory of their shimmer lives in your cells. Those lights are caused not by fire, but by electrons dancing, returning from a state of excitement to a state of rest. The same dance that plays out in your own oxygen molecules when you dream. You're more connected to the stars than you realize. And as your body lies still, oxygen moves without pause. It carries your last thought to the cells that need it. It keeps your heart steady. It listens. Because oxygen is not just an element, it is a thread. It connects the atmosphere to the ocean, the forest to the fire, the stars to your lungs. It is the quiet keeper of life's rhythm, and the patient architect of change. Even in aging, in rust, in gentle decay, oxygen remains a faithful guide. It does not rush, it teaches. Every leaf that crumbles, every fruit that ripens, every breath you forget you're taking, they are all oxygen's poems. They are all love letters written in the electrons. And so now, as your thoughts begin to float, like pale vapour in cold light, you understand the strange title you've carried with you through this journey. How fire freezes at -196 degrees Celsius. It is not just a scientific curiosity. It is a whisper of how nature weaves opposites together. Heat and cold, stillness and combustion, light and sleep. The blue flame of liquid oxygen burns not like a blaze but like a lullaby. It flickers in dreams. It reminds you that the quietest things can hold the deepest force, that the most essential elements, air, breath, silence, are also the most invisible. And as your breathing slows, as your body softens into the dark, oxygen stays. Not as something to think about, but as something that simply is. No longer the subject of study. No longer a question to be answered. Just a presence, humming gently beside you. It does not ask you to understand anymore. It asks only that you rest, that you trust it to do what it has always done, to move in and out of you like a tide, like a wind, like a secret. And just before sleep takes you, you feel it one more time, that strange cool fire flickering in the dark, waiting patiently for the next breath, the next story, the next quiet flame. But let us float lower now, down to a younger Earth where skies held no such guardians. 4 billion years ago, the atmosphere was a stranger to you. There was no oxygen here, not one molecule. The sky was likely rust red or hazy grey, thick with methane, hydrogen, ammonia, gases that would stifle your every breath. Volcanoes heaved and spat. Lightning cracked over steaming oceans. The air smelled of sulphur, not rain. And yet, from those murky depths, life stirred. Tiny, unseen life. The first cells were not noble or large. They did not breathe oxygen at all. In fact, they would have died in its presence. Anaerobic cells, that is, life without air, flourished in this ancient stew. They fed on minerals, on heat, on chemical gradients seeping from oceanic cracks. For more than 1 billion years, the Earth's biosphere belonged to these primitive architects. They built the stage, slowly and unseen, and then one of them made a mistake, or perhaps a miracle. A kind of cyanobacteria emerged. These microscopic blue-green threads learned to harness sunlight. They took in carbon dioxide and water and, with the soft push of photons, split molecules apart. The leftovers, oxygen. They exhaled it the way you exhale now, except no one was waiting to breathe it. It filled the seas first, oxidizing the dissolved iron into rust-red precipitates that fell like snow to the seabed, forming banded iron stone, layered memories now buried in cliffs and mountains. Then oxygen crept into the air. And the world was never the same. Scientists call it the Great Oxygenation Event, a slow drama played over hundreds of millions of years. But to the microbes of that time, it was a catastrophe. Oxygen was toxic to them, a chemical curse. Many perished. Others fled into deeper anoxic pockets of water and rock, where their descendants still live today, in mud, in guts, in extreme environments where air cannot go. But some organisms adapted. They evolved machinery to use oxygen's hunger for electrons in their favor. They became efficient, fierce, enduring. In those ancient shifts, the ancestors of your own cells were born. Imagine this. Every breath you take is made possible by an extinction. A gas that once poisoned life became its lifeblood. A sky once heavy and inert became laced with possibility. And so the earth learned to breathe. Trees came later. Ferns, mosses, towering cycads. Forests exhaled oxygen in return for light. Insects grew enormous in these oxygen-rich ages. Dragonflies as wide as hawks. Millipedes the length of tables. The air carried more than just wind. It carried growth, weight, and scale. Yet the sky forgets nothing. Traces of ancient atmospheres remain, locked in bubbles beneath glaciers, recorded in the breath of ice. Scientists drill deep into Antarctic cores and find layers like tree rings, some from volcanic winters, some from blooming forests, some from burning coal. We live in a time where we can read the sky's memory, learn the old rhythms and sense the changes. The oxygen concentration in your room tonight, about 21%, is not a given. It's a balance, a breath-by-breath agreement between geology, biology, and time. You may wonder, why doesn't oxygen keep increasing? Why doesn't it fill the air to overflowing, lighting wildfires with every strike of lightning? Because there is another dance at play. For every leaf releasing O2, there is decay pulling it back down. Microbes breaking down fallen trees, animals exhaling carbon dioxide, iron binding oxygen in silent rust. The world holds its breath in a cycle, always close to equilibrium, always slightly out of tune. And now, with fossil fuels and warming air, we press against that balance. Slowly, the composition of the sky shifts, not wildly, not yet, but measurably. Still tonight, the air around you remains familiar, full of ghosts and stars. The oxygen you breathe was born of ancient seas and shaped by living forests. It lingers in the blue of the daytime sky, scattering short wavelengths, turning harsh sunlight into soft cerulean. When you look up during the day, you're not just seeing atmosphere, you're seeing oxygen's touch, bending light for your eyes to see. Even the silence of high altitudes is part of the story. Climb high enough, and there is no longer enough pressure to push oxygen into the lungs. Climbers on Everest speak of a strange calm at the summit, a trance-like state. The body, too hungry for air, begins to slow, quiet, conserve. It is a reminder that our world is not designed evenly. It is sculpted for breath near sea level, not for peaks or voids. Your chest, your blood, your very mitochondria are all tuned to this gentle pressure, this narrow window. You belong to this sky, not all skies. The next time you look up, remember, the sky is not empty. It is filled with the memory of breath, the sigh of forests, the echo of algae stirring in primeval tides. You inhale molecules touched by creatures you've never seen, by stars you'll never reach, by time itself. And somewhere far above, on the edge of cold clarity, some of that oxygen begins to shift. Pressure drops, temperatures fall, the air thins like lace, and one molecule begins to change. You follow it now, higher still, where the sky turns from blue to violet to black, and the strange cold of liquid oxygen begins to form its first drops in the stillness. You drift downward now, gently, as if lowered on threads of green light. The oxygen you followed into the cold stratosphere begins its return to Earth, not in wind, not in rain, but in the arms of something rooted, quiet, and ancient. You land not on a star or a lab bench, but on the wide palm of a leaf, trembling softly in the sun. Around you, an entire forest breathes without sound. Here in this green cathedral, something near miraculous happens with every sunrise. Light becomes breath. You may think of plants as still, but within every cell of every leaf, a kind of light-eating magic takes place. Photosynthesis, the word is called, though that word is far too clinical, too narrow, for what this truly is. This is the alchemy of air and sun, the secret exchange where invisible elements become visible life. The leaf, to your wondering eyes, now becomes more than shape and colour. Its surface is not solid but porous, a mosaic of tiny mouths called stomata, each one able to open and close like lips. Through these pores, carbon dioxide enters, drifting from the breath of animals, from the exhale of oceans, from the slow crumbling of rocks. Light, meanwhile, falls like gold dust upon the leaf surface, absorbed into chlorophyll, that deep green pigment so rich it almost hums. Inside the chloroplasts, the cell's sunrooms, the real transformation begins. With light as the key, the chloroplast splits water molecules drawn from the roots. It cleaves them into hydrogen and oxygen, an elegant, silent violence. The hydrogen is kept, used to build sugar chains and store energy. The oxygen, unwanted byproduct, is exhaled back into the air. This waste, this leftover, becomes the air you breathe. You're alive because leaves are generous, and now, gently, the forest reveals its rhythm. During the day, trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen, stitching atmosphere into balance. At night, without sunlight, they pause their production and in their own way breathe in. But over days and weeks and years, the net flow is clear. Forests are lungs, and oxygen is their gift. A gift not wrapped or hoarded, but released leaf by leaf, unnoticed, unthanked. You picture now the layers, towering canopies above, speckled with light, middle branches where birds nest and squirrels dash, undergrowth of mosses and ferns, all participating in this quiet commerce. Even algae in ponds, unnoticed and glinting, perform the same task, pulling carbon in, pushing oxygen out. Rainforests, though they shimmer with green, are not the only source. Most of the oxygen you breathe comes not from trees but from the oceans, from plankton, from microscopic drifting gardens. The sea, too, is a forest. And this green chemistry is not only generous, it is ancient. Long before the first tree took root, single-celled cyanobacteria floated in warm tides, splitting light and releasing oxygen into the seas. The process has changed little since then. Your lungs, in their inner branching pattern, echo the veined networks of leaves. The alveoli and the chloroplast, separated by kingdoms, answer to the same master, the sun. Let your breath deepen as this thought settles. Every meal you've ever eaten, every fruit, every grain, every seed, was a product of this alchemy. Energy stored in carbon chains formed in leaf light. Even the meat or milk you may have consumed comes from animals that fed on plants, or those that fed on others who did. All energy flows backward, like a river, to the moment sunlight touched chlorophyll. Photosynthesis is not merely chemistry. It is the root of food, of forests, of flame. But even here, in this peaceful forest, the process is not simple. Photosynthesis is a balancing act. Plants must open their stomata to gather carbon dioxide, but in doing so, they risk losing water. In dry climates, in heat, the risk is greater. So some plants evolve clever tricks, stomata that open only at night, or biochemical cycles that store CO2 until dawn. The desert cactus, the cornfield stalk, the alpine pine, all solve the same puzzle in their own quiet dialects. And what of the trees themselves? Each leaf is temporary, a seasonal flare. Come autumn, the chlorophyll breaks down, and other pigments, carotenes, anthocyanins, flare red and gold before the leaf falls. Oxygen production slows. The tree prepares for sleep. Yet beneath the bark, deep in the cambium, the tree remembers how to begin again. In spring, buds unfurl. Leaves return. The cycle resumes. In this way, the forest is a slow breath, measured not in seconds but in seasons, and through it, oxygen is passed like a note from one generation to the next. You might walk beneath the same trees your ancestors did, breathing the same elemental gifts. Trees have stood vigil across centuries, their leaves catching light that left the sun 8 minutes before, turning it into something you now carry in your chest. Think, too, of the fragility. A single tree can produce enough oxygen annually for 2 human beings, but only when paired with a host of others. Clear the forest, burn the field, darken the ocean, and the rhythm falters. Even so, plants endure. Seeds hide in dry soil for decades. Spores wait in crevices. Life, once given sunlight, begins again. And just as plants give oxygen to you, you give carbon dioxide in return. Your every breath is a thread in the web, an offering, a reply. This exchange is not just chemical. It is sacred. When you sit beneath a tree, both of you are breathing each other's stories. Beneath this green canopy, something else stirs. A thought. If light can become food, if air can become flesh, what else might be possible? What happens when the oxygen made here on Earth is cooled so deeply, so completely, that it becomes something entirely new? Not gas, not breath, but liquid. Your mind, softened by the rhythm of leaves and lungs, begins to imagine that transformation, the fall of temperature, the hush of a laboratory, the shimmer of blue mist. Somewhere, in a chamber colder than winter, oxygen will cease to float and begin to fall, condensing not into rain, but into something stranger. You take one last breath beneath the green branches and feel the warmth of sunlight somewhere beyond your closed lids. But now it's time to follow that breath once more. This time, not to the forest or the sky, but to the cold, gleaming threshold where gases become liquids. And just beyond that door, the laboratory waits, silent, chilled, and luminous with vapor. And so you follow. From forest leaf to lung, from the warm green breath of photosynthesis to the cooled hush of your own body. This time your journey turns inward again, through vessels and valves, past ribs and bone, into the quiet, glowing engine room of your cells. Here, the oxygen gifted to you by oceans and trees begins its second act, not as breath, but as fire. Not the kind of fire that rages or devours. This is no crackling hearth, no blaze of twigs or flame dancing along a wick. This is the fire in slow motion, the fire you never see but always feel, the one that turns food into motion, into thought, into the warmth of your skin on a cold night. This fire lives inside every one of your cells, flickering in millions of tiny furnaces called mitochondria. The mitochondria, like softly lit rooms within a grand mansion, are small compartments with a secret. They host a chemical ritual older than you, older than mammals, older than even leaves. Each of these organelles takes in oxygen, not to fill lungs, but to ignite a reaction. Inside, sugars and fats, once part of bread or fruit or oil, are broken down step by step. The glucose molecules, split like logs into smaller pieces, release their captured sunlight. And at the very end of this chain, oxygen is waiting. It waits, not hungrily, but patiently, like a guest of honor. And when electrons finally tumble into its arms, water is made. Not steam, not smoke, just H2O. 1 part fuel, 1 part flame, 1 part exhale. It is strange, isn't it? to imagine that the act of breathing leads not just to oxygen entering you, but to new water forming inside you. That your fire does not burn but weeps gently into the tissues that surround it. Each flicker of this slow fire powers your very life. The currency is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, a tiny molecule with a spark of potential energy folded into its bonds. Cells spend ATP the way you might spend coins, using them to contract muscles, transmit thoughts, carry nutrients, repair wounds. Every time you blink, 1 million ATP molecules vanish into motion. Every word you whisper costs countless sparks, and behind it all the oxygen waits, fuels, finishes. The elegance of it is astonishing. Your breath becomes a torch, but one so subtle you never smell the smoke. A human body at rest burns about 100 watts worth of energy, enough to light a dim bulb. But instead of heat escaping in wild flares, your system converts it with masterful precision. You're always burning, but never burned. This process, called aerobic respiration, is your body's preferred way of making energy. It's slower than fire, but far more efficient. Without oxygen, your cells must resort to fermentation, which produces only a fraction of the energy and leaves behind sour byproducts like lactic acid. You know the feeling, the ache in your legs after a sprint, the soreness in your arms after lifting. That is the whisper of oxygen absence, and the quiet return of breath. That's the body reclaiming its preferred rhythm, returning to the slow burn, to the long-lasting glow. In your brain, which uses 1/5 of your total oxygen, this fire never stops. Neurons flicker with electrical signals, drawing oxygen into their webs like moths to light. Even in dreams, the brain pulses and stirs, consuming air, creating meaning. Perhaps this is why breath and thought feel so connected, why a held breath can freeze your mind, why a deep exhale can unlock memory or melt fear. Your neurons crave oxygen like poetry craves silence. But this fire is not without risk. Oxygen, for all its virtue, is also volatile. It is reactive, eager, easily stirred into excess. Inside the cell, some oxygen molecules stray from the path. They snatch electrons too early, becoming reactive oxygen species, unstable, half-lit sparks that can damage DNA, rupture membranes, or age tissues over time. To contain this, your cells produce antioxidants, molecular shields that catch these sparks, neutralize them, and sweep them away. This balancing act is vital. Too little oxygen, and you weaken. Too much, and you risk combustion from within. In hospitals, oxygen is administered with care, its levels carefully controlled, not because it's rare, but because it's powerful. The line between remedy and harm is thin as mist. Yet your body, evolved across billions of sunrises and tides, manages this equilibrium with grace. Red blood cells pick up oxygen in the lungs and release it in tissues where the need is highest. They respond to pressure, to acidity, to temperature, factors that subtly shape how tightly they hold their cargo. Hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen, changes its grip like a hand adjusting to hold a delicate bird, firm in transit, gentle at delivery. And so, your cells are fed. The mitochondria burn their food. You live. But even as you rest, even now the process continues. A cascade of reactions in utter darkness, powered by light you can no longer see. You're asleep perhaps, but the fire goes on. Think of what this means. You're not merely alive because you breathe. You're alive because breath becomes chemistry, and chemistry becomes light, and light becomes you. In the fetal womb, when your lungs are still quiet, oxygen arrives from the mother's blood. After birth, your first breath is the moment the fire begins. It is not dramatic in sound, perhaps just a gasp, but it is chemical thunder. The torch is lit. From that moment until your last exhale, the cycle never pauses. Even in sleep, even now, this fire does not crackle, it does not roar, but it glows in every cell, every second. It whispers instead of shouts. And perhaps that's why it is so easy to forget. But when you close your eyes and slow your breath, you return to it, to the warmth within, to the spark that asks for no praise but carries you, endlessly, forward. And yet, what if we dared to make it visible? What if, instead of hiding deep within cells, oxygen's flame rose into view? In laboratories, this fire can be coaxed into brilliance, intensified, manipulated, made to behave in ways that border on the impossible. The same oxygen you burn silently can, under the right conditions, create flames that hiss, explode, or disappear entirely. And the strangest part of all, if you cool that same oxygen low enough, so low it loses all familiarity, so low it becomes not gas but liquid, then even fire behaves differently. At those temperatures, even heat begins to retreat. You're approaching the threshold where oxygen becomes not breath, not flame, but frozen light. And just beyond that threshold, the laboratory waits, its beakers steaming with blue mist, its pipes coiled like serpents in slumber. Step quietly. The next breath you take may not be warm at all. You step through the imagined threshold now, not with shoes, but with thought. The forest is far behind, the soft breathing of cells a quiet memory. You stand instead on the edge of something colder, stranger, more luminous. A laboratory, yes, but not one full of noise or urgency. This is a temple of frost, where every surface glows faintly, where each hiss of gas is like a sigh held in the lungs of the earth. Here, metal gleams under dim lights. Tubes coil like frozen rivers, connecting glass flasks that pulse with cold breath. The air itself is different, sharper, still. You do not smell it. You feel it. The way your skin senses snowfall before it lands, or how silence thickens just before a storm. This is where oxygen learns its second life. Not the fire bearer, not the breath giver, but the ice maker. At minus 196 degrees Celsius, almost 200 degrees below freezing, oxygen does something it rarely does in the wild. It stops being gas. It condenses, folds in upon itself and becomes a liquid. Not milky, not muddy, but a crystal clear fluid with a faint blue tint, the exact shade of an alpine glacier under moonlight. It flows slowly, heavier than water, as if reluctant to move at all. You watch it drip from a nozzle into a beaker, and for a moment you cannot quite believe what you're seeing. This is breath, liquefied. Fire's fuel, captured in a form that resembles frozen wind. Touch is impossible. Even to brush a fingertip against the beaker would be to invite frostbite. Liquid oxygen is so cold it will make the moisture in the air freeze instantly, coating surfaces with ghostly white hoarfrost. It boils violently at room temperature, not because it is hot, but because room temperature is to it an inferno. That slow, steady simmer in the flask is not heat being added, but heat escaping it. Its molecules waking up from their suspended trance. You lean closer, drawn by the shimmering stillness. Beneath the surface swirls form and vanish, a slow dance of convection currents moving through the cold. No flame would dare live here. No breath would survive it. And yet this is oxygen still, unchanged in essence, only transformed by temperature. It is a lesson you feel deep in your chest. Identity is not fixed. Even the air you rely on can slip into another state, another rhythm, under the right conditions. A gloved hand appears in the frame of your mind, holding a small object, perhaps a rose dipped quickly into the liquid. When lifted out, the petals shatter like glass with the lightest tap. Beauty turned brittle, life made fragile by extreme cold. The oxygen did not kill the flower, it preserved it in stillness. That's the paradox you begin to sense. Cold can stop time, but only by halting motion, and what of fire? The scientists here sometimes demonstrate this not for spectacle, but to show the paradox in its rawest form. A candle flame brought near a stream of liquid oxygen doesn't burn out immediately. It flares up first, with brilliant, urgent hunger. Oxygen is fuel, after all, but then the flame dies, not for lack of air, but for excess of it. Too much oxygen, too cold to sustain combustion. The wick chokes on its own banquet. What was fire becomes ash. What was light becomes steam. You think of that now as you imagine reaching toward the flask. You don't, of course. But in your mind you hold a drop suspended in the air, watching it shimmer like a pearl in stasis. A liquid drop of breath, blue and trembling, waiting to either boil into vapor or freeze into crystalline solid. Because if cooled even further, beyond minus 218 degrees Celsius, oxygen turns from liquid into ice. Actual solid oxygen. Pale blue crystals, dense and eerie, like something from a dream of Neptune. It is possible to make this happen, though it is rare. You must cool it more, pressurize it gently, whisper it into stillness. At that point it becomes not just cold but compressed. A ghost turned glass. Scientists have described its beauty. Smooth, jewel-toned fragments that glow faintly under UV light, containing nothing but the frozen echoes of atmosphere. In that state, it no longer moves. It remembers nothing. It is oxygen asleep. And here, you pause, because now you understand something new. Oxygen is not a single idea. It is not just what you breathe or what burns in a flame. It is a shapeshifter, dancing between gas and liquid and solid, between life-giving and life-threatening. It is fire and ice, hunger and stillness, storm and peace, all depending on its temperature, its environment, its moment. This realization quiets something inside you. Because if oxygen can change, so completely, so elegantly, then perhaps you can too. Not overnight, not suddenly, but gradually, with the right pressure, the right stillness, the right cold. Change need not be violent. It can be slow. It can be beautiful. You take a breath, as if to taste this lesson. And though your room is warm, your lungs welcome the idea of that cold laboratory, of beakers holding silence, of air becoming liquid, becoming frost. But you're not finished. Not yet. Because in this strange chamber of cold, other reactions begin to emerge. Reactions not just of oxygen itself, but of how other elements behave in its presence. You have seen the liquid, yes, but you haven't yet seen how it touches flame, not in theory, but in reality. You haven't seen what happens when frozen fire meets living spark, and just beyond the chamber door, a wick waits, a flame lit by trembling hands. And oxygen, blue and cold, spills like moonlight toward the heat. We are not done watching it burn. Beyond the cold silvered doorway, the chamber deepens into a sanctuary of slowness, of careful breath and tempered light. You enter as though into a dream with a heartbeat of metal. Here, silence hums softly through the walls, not from absence, but from precision. This is not a place of haste. It is a place where time is persuaded, not pushed, where everything waits in the stillness of cryogenic patience. The laboratory breathes its own rhythm. You sense it in the gentle hiss of escaping nitrogen, the low pulse of compressors, the ghostly shimmer of cold mist curling just above the floor. The air feels dense, like velvet. Surfaces gleam with frost-laced steel, their edges softened by a powdering of ice that never melts, only settles. Nothing here moves quickly. Even the light, filtered through layered glass and low-intensity lamps, spills slowly, casting long, blue-edged shadows across the benches. In the centre of this sanctum sits a large dew-covered dewar, a double-walled vessel designed to hold what the world itself rarely sees. Liquefied gases colder than polar night. Inside it sloshes the stuff of breath turned myth. Liquid oxygen, a sky condensed into cold colour. Not in clouds or vapour, but gathered in a still pool so heavy, it feels almost wrong that it was once weightless in the air. And yet there it is, blue as glacier melt, dense as poured moonlight. Technicians move like dancers. Every step is deliberate, every gloved gesture rehearsed and exact. They do not speak loudly. Voices here would shatter the hush. Instead, they murmur in short codes, fingers signalling across glassware and coiled tubing, charting temperatures on digital screens where numbers fall below freezing and keep falling. 190, 193, 196 there. The moment oxygen forgets how to float and learns how to flow, you're invited closer. Not physically, but imaginatively. The bench ahead is layered with chilled tools, flasks rimmed with frost, tongs blackened from previous burns, a metal crucible that radiates cold like a miniature moon. And now, gently, a funnel lowers toward the mouth of a smaller beaker. Liquid oxygen is decanted in the softest of streams, slow and pure, emitting a mist that writhes and spills over the rim like fog escaping a dream. The moment is tender, sacred even, as if the gas in turning liquid must be handled not like a substance, but like a mood. The vapour lingers near the floor denser than air. It behaves unlike steam. It does not rise. It hugs surfaces, gathers in corners, slips along cracks like a shy animal in search of shelter. This is what happens when gases are calmed, when they are chilled past motion and made to remember silence. Then comes the candle, small, plain, a cotton wick coiled at the centre of a simple wax pillar. It is already lit, dancing with its usual orange flicker, a warmth that seems out of place in this room of chill breath. The flame crackles softly, alive in its own rhythm, unaware of what is coming. It dances as any flame does, graceful, indifferent, hungry. And now, the drop. A tiny vial of liquid oxygen, drawn by pipette, suspended over the flame. It is not poured all at once, but released one drop at a time. The first drop hisses as it falls, vanishing almost before it touches the air, but not before the flame reacts. It flares, violently, impossibly bright. The yellow core becomes white-hot, the edges laced with blue. It leaps upward as though trying to escape itself, as though the sudden feast of oxygen has startled it into frenzy. Then it settles. A second drop. The flare again, brighter, whiter. The flame elongates, curls, almost tears itself apart. For an instant it is no longer a candle, but a torch, a dragon's tongue. Oxygen does not merely feed it, it transforms it. A third drop. And now the flame becomes something elemental. It is no longer a gentle light for comfort. It is chemistry unbound, a spectacle of reaction. But then, too much. With one final, larger drop, the flame sputters, grows wild, and dies. Not from suffocation, not from wind, but from excess. The flame, overwhelmed by fuel, cannot hold its structure. It drowns in its own abundance. The candle goes dark. A curl of smoke remains, ghosting upward in the cold, where even smoke seems reluctant to rise. You breathe softly, in awe, in reflection. That was fire met by its maker. That was the core of chemistry laid bare. How everything that fuels can also destroy. How too much life is indistinguishable from death when balance is lost. In this frozen laboratory, you've witnessed a truth that extends beyond oxygen. You've seen how states of matter are not just physical changes, but emotional metaphors. Gas is freedom. Liquid is grace. Solid is memory. Each phase, a way of being. And temperature, the silent sculptor, decides which mask the molecule wears. The scientists make notes, not hurriedly, not with pride, but with the still, calm hands of those who understand what they have seen. They are not here to impress. They are here to listen, to what cold teaches, to what oxygen reveals when it is made to sleep, then stir, then burn. Beyond the glass, the world carries on. Warm rooms, summer winds, city streets pulsing with engines and laughter. But here, in this vault of frost, you're reminded that the ordinary, air, fire, breath, is never truly ordinary. It is only waiting to be seen from another angle, a colder one, a closer one. And even now, the laboratory has more to show. Because it is not just oxygen that behaves this way. Other elements too shift and shimmer when brought into the realm of the cold. And what happens when we combine them? Oxygen with hydrogen, with nitrogen, with metals. What new forms of reaction emerge in the half-silent world below zero? You sense that the experiment has only just begun. And somewhere, deeper in this sleeping lab, a tank is being prepared. Not for demonstration, but for transformation. Liquid oxygen awaits a companion, and a new kind of fire is preparing to rise. You linger in the stillness of the laboratory, that strange womb of frost and silver, where nothing moves quickly and yet everything transforms. The candle has gone out, its wax soft and slanted, the wick now a black thread curled like a question mark in the hush. But in another corner of the room, preparations begin again, not for warmth, but for a contradiction, for a flame that, in its final breath, surrenders not to water or wind, but to cold. The experiment is older than it looks. Somewhere deep in the worn notes of chemists past, this ritual has been repeated 1,000 times. Take the most ordinary symbol of life, fire, and show what happens when it meets a sky so cold it cannot remain sky. Here, oxygen is not a presence you invite gently into your lungs. Here, it is a force. It floods and surrounds. It smothers with generosity. The technician lifts a metal crucible, small and stained from use, and places it onto a steel grid. Beneath it lies a ceramic dish, blackened and pitted from many trials. This is the stage, and the actor, again, is oxygen, but not as gas, not as breath, not as spirit in the air, as liquid, dense, dripping, almost mournful in its beauty. The flask is poured again, and once more the laboratory mist thickens and flows. You know now how to read it, not as fog, but as proof that something elemental has been changed. But this time, there is no candle, no wick. Instead, a small cotton ball is dipped in alcohol and placed carefully at the centre of the dish. It is lit with a metal wand, its flame blue, quieter, steadier than wax. No crackle, no flicker, just the clear, purposeful burn of something ready. And then, the pour. Liquid oxygen is released in a slow arc over the fire. For a split second, the flame leaps in gratitude. Yes, a brilliant bloom of combustion as oxygen feeds the alcohol's hunger. But it is too much, too soon. Like a garden flooded by rain, the flame begins to drown in its own ecstasy. It twists, recoils, swells unnaturally, then collapses. The fire extinguishes itself, not from a lack of oxygen, but from too much. You watch the dish. The cotton ball smoulders, ringed with frost. A faint hiss rises. What was heat moments ago is now wrapped in cold, as if the flame has been buried in snow rather than smothered in smoke. Around the edges, the spilled oxygen bubbles, then vanishes into mist, its momentary life in liquid ending once more in vapour. It is unsettling. To see a flame try and fail to survive where its greatest ally becomes its undoing. The rules of childhood, oxygen equals fire, are rewritten here. What was once the kindling of life becomes, in excess and cold, the reason for its silence. And deeper still is this contradiction. The flame you just watched die wasn't frozen in the sense of turning solid, but it was robbed of its motion, of its persistence. That's how cold conquers fire, not with weight, but with slowness. Heat is speed, flame is chaos, but in this chamber, speed has been banished. Molecules move like dancers trapped in honey. Time thickens, even chaos becomes quiet. That's what fascinates the scientists here. Not the spectacle, though it is beautiful, but the edge of understanding it represents. Fire, in its purest form, is a reaction, a release of energy as bonds break and reform. But when you chill the oxygen, the reactions slow, or they halt. Flame flickers, then stutters, then stops. And in that silence, you glimpse something rare, the limits of energy itself. There are other demonstrations too. You watch one now, forming in your mind as if you're seated in the front row of this strange theatre. A steel ball is dipped in liquid oxygen, then struck with a mallet. Instead of bouncing, it shatters. Not because it's weak, but because it has become glass-like, brittle from the cold. The very hardness of steel disappears under the weight of stillness. Oxygen, so fluid and essential in your bloodstream, now becomes an accomplice to this transformation. It doesn't merely allow fire, it allows breakage, fragility. Fire that flares, then freezes. Steel that rings, then cracks. The same element you associate with life and vigour becomes the quiet minister of stillness. You begin to wonder, what happens in nature when this balance tips? When oxygen freezes not in labs, but in the dark corners of the cosmos? On moons or icy planets where temperatures never rise above liquid nitrogen's soft whisper? Out there, in the deep quiet, oxygen is not something you breathe. It is part of the rock, the ice, the dust. It is bound and waiting, dormant. Back in the laboratory, the scientists clean the dishes, reset the tools, but you're still inside the moment, still standing at the edge of the crucible where that last flame died. You think of all the metaphors we've built on fire, passion, life, soul, and realize that even they can freeze, not disappear, just change form. There's a quiet comfort in that thought. Nothing is truly lost in science, only transformed. Heat becomes motion, motion becomes stillness, oxygen becomes ice, fire becomes memory. Even the flame you saw vanished, left behind a shimmer in the air, a faint warmth in the metal, a curl of vapour, like a fading sigh. And now, something new awaits. In the lab's far chamber, a different experiment is being prepared, one that involves pressure, one that explores what happens when oxygen is no longer alone, but brought into contact with materials that carry their own volatility. Metals, hydrogen, even organic fuels. Because while oxygen alone can be quiet, when paired, it becomes unpredictable. It does not always freeze. Sometimes it awakens. Sometimes it builds toward reactions so fast, so fierce, that flame is only the beginning. And just beyond the frost-lined door, steel begins to hum, and oxygen waits to touch something it has never met in this form. Ask ChatGPT. The frost-lined door is half open now, and you slip through with breath held, not from fear, but reverence. You have followed oxygen through so many incarnations, as breath in your chest, as a slow fire in your cells, as liquid mist curling over laboratory steel. But now, you're invited into something rarer. Something that flickers between beauty and danger. A chamber not only of cold, but of colour, where chemistry becomes visible, and reactions unfold like auroras beneath glass. The air is heavier here, not oppressive, just full. Saturated with the memory of trials, of flames lit and studied, of matter transformed again and again in pursuit of understanding. Lights are dimmed low, not for drama but for visibility. Because what happens in this chamber cannot be seen under fluorescent glare, it requires darkness, softness, the hush of a watching mind. In the centre of the room lies a circular containment platform, rimmed in thick fire brick and surrounded by heat-shielded panels. Above it a robotic arm hovers, holding a shallow dish. Below, a coiled pipe glistens with hoarfrost. This is where the reaction will take place, not in a furnace, but in a stage crafted from cold and caution. Today's trial is simple on paper, yet mesmerizing in practice. What does it look like when liquid oxygen feeds combustion in a precise metered burst? The material to be burned is a fine powder. Lycopodium spores, a golden yellow dust often used in theatrical flashes. Alone, it burns quickly but quietly. But paired with liquid oxygen, it becomes something else entirely. You watch as the technician, clad in silver-insulated gloves, positions the dust above the dish and releases it. A puff, a breath of golden fog. The oxygen is introduced, not poured, but misted, atomized through tiny nozzles that hiss like whispers. The flame ignites not with a boom, but a bloom. A slow, spreading glow begins at the center, blue at the base, then violet, then a fringe of white so pale it feels like looking into moonlight. The fire lifts, not roaring, but expanding, stretching upward in delicate filaments like fingers tracing the outline of air. There is no smoke, only a glow. You realize the flame is not orange, not yellow, not red. It is blue. Blue, the color of precision, of high temperatures, of molecular dances performed at exact rhythms. In normal combustion, you see yellow and orange because the reaction is incomplete. Carbon particles glow as they escape. But here, with liquid oxygen feeding the flame so cleanly, so eagerly, there is no waste, only pure oxidation, only blue fire, and then the pale ice. As the chamber cools again, and the nozzles stop, the oxygen reverts. The mist sinks. Around the edges of the containment dish, a frost ring forms, so delicate it looks painted. Water vapor in the air condenses instantly, freezing in lace-like crystals that shimmer with blue under the overhead UV lamp. This is not just a side effect, it is a silent signature. A message written in cold. Something extraordinary has happened here. You lean closer, imagining yourself at the edge of that dish. The heat has gone. The reaction has finished. But the residue glows faintly still, not from embers, but from residual light scattered in vapor. This is what remains when oxygen has finished its song. Not destruction, not ashes, but quiet, beauty, a cool, clean end. This moment teaches you something elemental. We often think of fire as red, wild, violent, but that is only one of its costumes. True fire, pure fire, is blue. It hums instead of shouts. It dances with discipline, and when given just enough oxygen, not too much, not too little, it performs with the grace of a snowfall. And it is here, in this moment of balanced combustion, that you come to understand oxygen's second great lesson: restraint. Too little oxygen, and the reaction sputters. choked by its own yearning. Too much, and it burns out, consumed by the very fuel meant to nourish it. But in harmony, when molecules meet in exact ratio, something remarkable unfolds. The flame not only lives, it thrives in elegance. How many things in nature require the same? Balance, not abundance, not scarcity. Your breath is richest when you exhale slowly. Your heart beats strongest when not racing. Muscles grow not in frenzy, but in rest and rhythm. The cosmos itself spins in balance, galaxies held by gravity's gentle tether. And so too does fire find its true self in stillness and control. The technician speaks now, voice low, pointing toward a sample of liquid oxygen stored in a vacuum flask nearby. You remember what you've learned. That liquid oxygen is magnetic, slightly so, strong enough that if you bring it near a powerful magnet it will cling, it will move, not as if alive, but as if remembering its roots in the atomic spin of electrons. Even in this most alien form, liquid, shimmering, blue, it remains bound to the deep laws of physics, and you realize that this fire, this blue flicker, this ice-edged dance, is not just a spectacle. It is a story about identity, about transformation. In the same way that you too change under pressure and temperature, your mood shifting with light and season, oxygen reminds you that nothing is fixed. Even the most essential things can become unfamiliar in different conditions. That which burns can freeze, that which supports life can vanish into stillness, and yet it is still oxygen, still O2, the same molecule that filled the lungs of your ancestors, the same one stirred by the fins of fish and the wings of moths, the same one you exhale in dreams. Now, in this blue-lit chamber, it shows you yet another face. But this chapter is not yet done, because in a sealed cylinder at the rear of the laboratory, a new reaction is being prepared. This one will not glow blue, it will not whisper, it will roar. It involves not powder, not dust, but metal, something solid, something sharp. And when it meets oxygen, not as gas, not as mist, but as deep liquid, it will teach you that combustion is not always flame. Sometimes it is brilliance. Sometimes it is white light you cannot look into. And just beyond the frost-covered viewing glass, a rod of steel is being lowered into position, and the oxygen begins to pour like slow lightning. Ask ChatGPT behind the viewing glass. The laboratory takes a long breath, and so do you. Something is about to change. You can feel it, not in the chill of the air, but in the charged stillness that comes before revelation. The last experiment glowed with grace, all restraint and elegance, a blue ballet of balance. But now the stage is being reset. The mood thickens, the room darkens. A different kind of fire is stirring, one that doesn't flicker in soft waves but bursts in unforgiving clarity. This is oxygen's other voice, not nurturing, not illuminating, but consuming. The technician secures a length of steel rod in a vise, thick, unyielding, silent. Its surface shines with a dull sheen of strength, of permanence, of control. Steel is a language of civilization. We build bridges from it, towers, scaffolds for dreams we wish to see rise. We trust it not to bend, not to burn, not to break. But oxygen knows better. Oxygen remembers what time forgets. In your mind you trace the journey of that steel, how it was once ore, dug from the bones of mountains, smelted in roaring furnaces, alloyed with carbon to give it spine, how it has known heat, pressure, force, and come through unbroken. And yet now, beneath the nozzle of a cryogenic hose, even this proud rod will be humbled. Liquid oxygen begins to flow, not in a rush, but in a patient, glistening stream. It curls around the steel's base, pooling on the heat-resistant ceramic plate below. The air responds with hisses as curls of a white mist. Already the steel's temperature drops. You imagine what that does at the molecular level. Atoms drawing closer, vibrations slowing, a lattice of metallic confidence growing rigid with cold. And then, the flame. A torch is brought forward, its tip narrow, intensely blue, focused like a stare. The technician does not touch the steel with it. Not yet. Instead, they ignite a strip of magnesium nearby, a bright, searing white flare that makes your eyes flinch even through the screen. Magnesium is volatile, yes, but it is just the match. The true event begins when the burning magnesium is brought into contact with the oxygen-soaked steel. In a breath, everything changes. Steel, which resists fire in ordinary air, suddenly ignites with a force that feels ancient. Not red or yellow, but white-hot, blinding. It is not a flame, but a line of brilliance that tears through the metal like lightning made solid. Sparks leap like stars, some reaching the chamber walls, others vanishing mid-flight. The rod glows from the center outward, liquefying along its axis as the oxidation reaction spirals faster and faster. You don't just see it, you feel it. This isn't combustion, it's revelation. A reminder that strength, when exposed to pure desire, becomes weakness. That even steel can fall before the hunger of oxygen, if that oxygen is offered not gently in air, but pressed forward as liquid, cold, and overwhelming. The reaction is self-sustaining. It feeds on itself. Steel becomes fuel. The flame moves downward through the rod as if alive, tracing its own path, dragging the boundary between integrity and surrender with it. What remains behind is not ash or smoke, but slag, molten, glassy, and irreversibly changed. And here is the paradox. The very metal we prize for its resistance, for its stoic endurance, proves vulnerable in pure oxygen. In this moment, steel is not the master of architecture, but the victim of chemistry. And oxygen is not the breath of life, but the whisper of collapse. You think now about rust, about how slowly, silently, oxygen eats away at metal surfaces left in the open air. It doesn't roar then. It doesn't announce itself. It simply waits, bonds, oxidizes. A bridge left unattended, a nail forgotten in damp wood, the ghost of red crawling across silver. Rust is slow fire, the same reaction, only stretched across weeks, months, years. And it is everywhere. Even your blood carries traces of this story. The iron in your hemoglobin binds with oxygen to carry it through your veins. But this binding must be temporary, reversible. If it holds on too tightly, or if too many oxygen molecules arrive, damage begins. Even within you, this balance is managed second by second, as though your body remembers what happens when iron and oxygen fall too deeply into one another. And then there is fire's cousin, corrosion. The world, when exposed, when left too long in air and water and time, rusts. This is the long memory of oxygen, not just a partner in combustion, but in decay, in change, in endings that look like aging. You begin to wonder, was strength ever real? Or is it always conditional, dependent on temperature, on exposure, on time? Steel is strong until oxygen says otherwise. Wood is fuel until the forest is wet. Even fire dies in cold. Even breath stops in vacuum. There is no permanence, only context. And still, even in that surrender, there is beauty. The melted steel hardens again into strange ridged patterns. The slag catches the light like cooled lava, a memory of the reaction preserved in glass. The air smells of scorched metal and ozone. The fire is gone, but its echo remains in every twisted angle, every dull gleam of oxidized skin. The technician shuts down the chamber, steps back into the cool, dim room, and begins to log the results. But you remain within the flame. Not the one that danced earlier, but the one that destroyed, the one that stripped away the illusion of invincibility. Because you've now seen that oxygen, for all its gentleness, contains power that waits. And sometimes, to understand strength, you must first watch it fall. Yet the lab is not done. Behind another door, something more volatile stirs, a pairing more unstable, a reaction that doesn't just burn or melt, but explodes. Because now oxygen will be combined not with metal or dust, but with a gas of its own kind. Hydrogen, the simplest element, the lightest. And when these two meet, the result is not just chemistry. It is the story of stars. And just beyond the frost-hazed chamber, two pipes begin to fill. One with a whisper of sky, the other with a breath of sun, waiting to unite in a reaction older than Earth itself. The frost-hazed chamber stands like a waiting lung. Pipes coil along the walls, valves twitch softly under pressure, and within sealed cylinders lie two of the most elemental voices in the universe, oxygen and hydrogen. One born in the breath of trees, the other in the breath of stars. Separate they are quiet, but together they carry the power to ignite the heavens. And now, behind reinforced glass and pressure-rated seals, they begin to meet, not recklessly, but in the most carefully choreographed union science has ever conceived. This is not a fire of Earth. This is the combustion of cosmos. You stand in imagination before the fuel lines of a rocket engine test bench, not in space, but on a cold stretch of desert far from cities, where the ground itself has been darkened by past launches. The tanks shudder with stored energy. The oxygen is cryogenic, liquid and heavy, dripping in cold blue ropes as it's pumped through lines wrapped in silver insulation. The hydrogen is even colder, liquid at just 20 Kelvin, so cold it makes oxygen seem warm by comparison. It flows clear and nearly invisible, light enough to escape the Earth if not caged. And when these two gases finally mix in the combustion chamber, what happens is not fire as you know it. There is no crackle, no smoke. There is only light. A flash of such intensity, so white, so clean, that it defies the image of flame itself. The exhaust of a liquid hydrogen and oxygen engine is almost entirely steam, not soot, not carbon, just vapor, ghosting away at thousands of degrees, carrying ships towards silence. This precise balance of oxygen and hydrogen is the reaction at the heart of spaceflight. It is what fuels the rockets that leave Earth behind. Because to breathe in space, to move in space, to survive in space, you must bring your own fire. There is no atmosphere to feed you, no oxygen to borrow, no pressure to hold the molecules together. Every spark must be carried, every breath must be packed like a memory in a bottle. Inside spacecraft, oxygen is stored in compressed tanks, or released slowly from chemical reactions. Astronauts breathe carefully, their exhaled carbon dioxide captured by scrubbers and replaced with measured flows of O2. The systems are delicate. Even a trace too much oxygen, and fire becomes a threat. Too little, and the body quietly begins to fold inward. And yet, within that razor-thin window of concentration, humans float in space, hearts still beating, eyes still dreaming, because the breath has followed them. You close your eyes, and now you're no longer in the lab. You're aboard a space station orbiting silently over Earth's blue curve. Everything is soft, muffled. Your body moves slowly, not because you're tired, but because mass is no longer tethered. But still, your lungs rise and fall. Oxygen flows in, carbon dioxide flows out. The chemistry is the same as it was in your bed, in the forest, in the deepest parts of the sea. The only difference is distance. The oxygen in the station may have come from Earth, compressed and delivered, or it may have been split from water by electrolysis, using electricity from solar panels to tear H2O apart, freeing oxygen for breath and sending hydrogen off for recycling or venting. Here, science is not optional, it is survival. Chemistry is no longer abstract, it is air, and should disaster strike, should a leak occur or a fire break out, oxygen becomes both friend and threat. On Mir, on Apollo, even on the ISS, astronauts trained for the possibility of cabin fires. In low-pressure environments with pure or enriched oxygen, flames behave strangely. They move faster, they consume greedily. Materials not normally flammable on Earth can ignite. Velcro, wiring, even metal. That's the lesson oxygen brings to space. Never underestimate stillness. Never assume that silence means safety. Even in microgravity, reactions remain. Gases still seek bonds. Combustion still listens for the tiniest spark. You return now to the test bench, where the combustion of oxygen and hydrogen roars in controlled bursts. This sound is deafening, but more than that, it is sacred, because this is the sound of leaving, the sound of escape, of overcoming gravity's tether. These fuels, liquid O2 and H2, combine not only to generate thrust, but to remind you that even the most delicate molecules, when joined precisely, can lift worlds. And if you trace that reaction backward, further still, you arrive at something astonishing. This same process, hydrogen and oxygen forming water, is not just a rocket's fire. It is a star's whisper. In the cores of stars, hydrogen fuses into helium, releasing energy that radiates outward for millions of years before reaching Earth as sunlight. That light nourishes leaves. Leaves give oxygen. Oxygen meets hydrogen again, and we launch toward the stars from which they came. You are caught in this loop, this great circular breath of the universe. Light becomes leaf. Leaf becomes breath. Breath becomes thrust. Thrust returns to light. Nothing is wasted. Everything is translated. Even in the vacuum of space, fire finds a way to speak. Carefully, conditionally. It does not dance in flickers, but surges in pulses guided by valves and math. Astronauts, their faces lit by soft panels, know this. They understand the balance, the fragility, that a single tank, left unmonitored, can tip the scales from life to silence. And so oxygen, once again, is both gift and edge. It gives wings to rockets and breath to wanderers, but demands reverence. It must be carried in cylinders, whispered through regulators, paired with careful fuels. In space, every spark is sacred, every molecule is measured, and yet, here we are, floating, alive. But this chapter, even among the stars, has not revealed everything. There is still more oxygen has to teach, here on Earth, but deep below the surface. Because where space strips away pressure, the sea adds it. And under the weight of thousands of tons of water, oxygen behaves in yet another way. In the next journey, you will not float. You will sink. You will follow divers as they descend with tanks strapped to their backs carrying their own portable sky. And you will learn how pressure reshapes breath, how oxygen, even in excess, can bend the mind. And already, beneath the surface of the sea, bubbles rise slowly, each one carrying a breath that does not yet know if it will return. And now you sink, not in fear, but in awe. From the rocket's roar and the void's quiet clarity, you return to Earth, but not to its surface. You go deeper, past coral gardens and light-laced shoals, past the sunlit shallows where waves cradle swimmers and fish flicker like living brushstrokes. Down, down, into the blue below blue. This is not a place where lungs alone can keep you alive. This is a world where you must carry breath as armor. This is where oxygen comes in cylinders, compressed, strapped to backs, whispering through regulators like the hush of memory. The diver is your guide now, not a figure of spectacle, but of calm expertise, slow movements, and deliberate control. Each step into the sea is a surrender, a quiet bet placed against the weight of water. With fins at her feet and a tank on her spine, she walks backward into the swell, then slips beneath like a leaf returning to the stream. The descent begins. Air bubbles escape with every exhale, rising in mirrored chains, shrinking as they ascend. The deeper she goes, the more the pressure builds. Every 10 meters down, another full atmosphere added to the invisible weight pressing upon her. And with that pressure, the very nature of gases shifts. Oxygen, so familiar at the surface, begins to behave in strange new ways. In her tank, the gas is not just oxygen, it's a carefully mixed blend. Perhaps air, perhaps nitrox, perhaps trimix or heliox, engineered with precision to account for the body's fragile balance at depth. Too much nitrogen under pressure can intoxicate, a sensation divers call the rapture of the deep, where logic blurs and confidence blooms in dangerous ways. Too much oxygen too, and the very breath that gives life can cause convulsions. Oxygen toxicity, a paradox of pressure. You hover behind her, watching each exhale drift upward in silver threads. At 30 meters, the light shifts. Blue deepens, red vanishes. The world becomes monochrome, muffled. You no longer hear waves or birds or boats, only breath, only the soft mechanical inhale, the deliberate exhale. It is rhythm without rush, each breath a conscious act, each moment a tether to life. And yet, there is peace here. Unlike space, where air is sealed in rigid habitats, the ocean wraps itself around the diver like a second skin. The water holds her, pushes gently against every limb, and she responds not with fight, but with yield. Buoyancy compensators whisper small corrections, fins glide. The body becomes both animal and instrument. Inside her blood, oxygen continues its work, now under new laws. With pressure, its solubility increases. It dissolves into plasma, flows farther, reaches deeper, but this also means it must be managed. Divers are taught to monitor partial pressures, to know the limits, to ascend slowly, to respect decompression curves. Because if oxygen is withdrawn too quickly, if nitrogen is released too fast, the gases will form bubbles inside the body. Silent, invisible saboteurs. The bends, decompression sickness. Not a punishment, but a reminder. You realize, watching her glide past a school of silver jacks, that diving is a kind of negotiation. Every breath is a truce. The sea will allow you in, if you honor its math, its chemistry, its pressure. There are no shortcuts. There is no arrogance. Oxygen is not your guarantee. It is your promise to remain careful. The deeper she moves, the more dreamlike the world becomes. A shadow passes, a reef shark, elegant as indifferent. The coral here is pale, silent, slow growing. Even the fish move with the measured pace of creatures born to pressure. This is not a place for sudden movement. The ocean does not punish haste, it simply ignores it. And still, oxygen hums in her regulator. It moves from tank to hose, from mouth to lung, from blood to cell. Each molecule finds its home, does its work, then is let go. Carbon dioxide leaves with the exhale, riding bubbles upward like unspoken thoughts. But nothing escapes unnoticed. Her dive computer ticks softly, counting depth and time, calculating the moment when she must begin her ascent. She cannot stay forever. Oxygen is finite. And the body, no matter how well trained, was never built for this world. The lungs grow tired, the tank lightens, the nitrogen accumulates, the sea gently insists, rise. And so she does, slowly, carefully, with stops along the way. Safety stops, they call them. Pauses to let the body catch up, to let gases bleed out gently, to prevent the blood from boiling into pain. It is in these moments, those floating intervals in open water, that the ocean feels most holy. No floor beneath, no ceiling above, only breath and the faith that it will continue. You float beside her, weightless in thought. The tank still hisses. The mouthpiece still fits perfectly between her lips, but now she is nearer to the surface, nearer to sunlight. The blue begins to fade to turquoise. Shapes return. The colour red reappears faintly, and the bubbles, no longer compressed, grow larger as they ascend. Like hope. When she finally surfaces, it is without splash. Just a face rising through waves. Just the quiet triumph of having entered a world not built for lungs and returned, intact, with eyes wide open. She spits out the regulator, lifts her mask, breathes real air again. But she is not the same. She is altered, not in body, but in awareness. And so are you. You now understand that oxygen's story is not one of constancy, but of context. In space, it must be rationed. In the sea, it must be blended. On land, it is taken for granted. But in all places, it is law. A breath is never simple. It is contract, between pressure and body, between risk and reward. You close your eyes and feel your own lungs rise and fall. The air feels warmer now, softer, less distant, but somewhere in your memory there remains the sound of bubbles drifting upward, slow and silver, the reminder that even below the surface fire still flickers, cool, compressed, and sacred. But there is another layer still waiting, because oxygen, in yet another of its forms, climbs higher still. Not beneath the sea, not inside the body, not even in the frostlit lab. It forms a new shape entirely when it rises into the stratosphere. When 3 atoms come together, not 2, ozone, a shield, a sentinel, a version of oxygen with a different task, not to nourish, not to burn, but to guard. And already, high above the clouds where UV rays crack molecules and skies grow thin, a 3rd atom slips quietly into place, and oxygen becomes something sharper, stranger, and more protective than breath alone. High above where the birds end and the thunderheads lose their breath, where the air thins and turns to glass, oxygen takes on another mask. You followed it deep into your lungs, watched it melt into blue liquid, felt it feed a flame and drown a diver. But now, let your thoughts drift upward into the high atmosphere, where light itself begins to lose its warmth. Here, beyond the reach of trees and towers, oxygen becomes something sharper. It rearranges itself. It grows a 3rd arm, and with that, it becomes ozone. O3, not 2 atoms, but 3. Not the familiar breath giver, but the watchful guardian. A molecule forged in sunlight, fractured in sunlight, and reborn again in a cycle so delicate it might as well be breath on glass. Ozone doesn't exist to feed your lungs. In fact, if it enters them, it stings, it burns, it makes breath difficult. But high above, it wears a different purpose. It is a shield, a veil of protection between you and the oldest danger in the sky, ultraviolet radiation. The process is invisible, but relentless. Far above the Earth, ultraviolet light slams into O2 molecules with enough force to cleave them apart, splitting the oxygen into single atoms, unstable and wild. These single atoms don't stay lonely for long. They crash into other O2 molecules, bonding quickly, forming O3, ozone, and this ozone, in turn, absorbs more ultraviolet light, sacrificing itself to protect the skin of the world. This dance continues every second. Creation, destruction, protection. A chemical choreography unfolding in silence above the clouds. You imagine standing in that thin region, your body buffered by a suit, watching the play of light and molecules with your own eyes. The sun would not look the same. It would be raw, sharper, almost electric. You'd feel its bite even through glass. Without ozone, that light would pierce the atmosphere unfiltered, turning your skin to parchment, your eyes to mist. DNA would unravel, life would falter. So the ozone layer, thin as tissue, fragile as lace, is not just chemistry, it is memory. It holds the history of all who have walked under sky. It allows petals to unfold, leaves to reach, oceans to teem with tiny swimmers who ride the waves of sunlight but cannot survive its fire. The ozone layer is not vast. If compressed to sea level density, it would be a sheet only a few millimeters thick. And yet, it holds back oblivion. But ozone is not always ally. Down at ground level, it becomes something else, an irritant, a warning. When vehicles and factories release nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, and sunlight joins the mix, ozone forms near the surface. Here, it's not a shield, it's smog. It settles into lungs, inflames airways, makes breathing feel like trying to sip through a narrow straw. The same molecule, but context reversed. Guardian in the stratosphere, threat on the street. This duality lives in many elements, but oxygen embodies it with eerie elegance. O3 is only one of its many other faces. Sometimes, when oxygen interacts with metals, it forms oxides that shine and protect, like the patina on copper roofs or the silvery sheen on titanium exposed to air. But other times it corrodes, weakens, turns steel into crumble. It all depends on the balance, how fast it reacts, how much it is offered, how long it is left to act. You begin to understand that oxygen is not just a thing. It is a story told differently depending on light, pressure, and time. In one form, it is the breath of morning. In another, the pale frost in a cryogenic flask. In another, still, it is the whispering agent of age. Oxidative stress, the slow weathering of cells by oxygen's unending appetite, is part of why skin wrinkles, why organs grow tired, why memory sometimes fades. And yet, you need it. Always. Even though it asks a toll. Even though, like time, it gives while it takes. Your thoughts return to ozone now, drifting above you like a translucent skin stretched over the planet. There was a time, not long ago, when humans nearly broke it. In the late 20th century, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, escaped from refrigerators, sprays, and industrial coolants. These molecules, harmless on the ground, drifted up into the stratosphere, where sunlight broke them apart. Released chlorine atoms tore through ozone, each one capable of destroying thousands of O3 molecules before fading. A hole formed, a real one, not in the sky, but in the shield. Over Antarctica, ozone thinned to dangerous levels. Scientists sounded the alarm. For the first time, humanity realized it could injure something invisible, something it had always assumed would protect it by default. And for once, humanity listened. Agreements were signed, CFCs were phased out. The ozone began to heal, not quickly but slowly, like a patient relearning how to breathe. That healing continues even now. Above your head, in the middle of night, molecules still shatter and reform. The ozone layer is never fixed. It is not a wall. It is a river of reactions. It lives. And every sunrise, it takes the first hit for you. You take a breath in your room. You're far from the stratosphere, far from solar rays harsh enough to strip paint. But somewhere above, that third oxygen atom still drifts in fragile defense. You don't feel it. You don't thank it. But it is there, every time light breaks across your windowsill. And ozone is only one form. There are others. Singlet oxygen. O. An excited version that can wreak havoc inside cells. Superoxide, hydrogen peroxide. Oxygen's various masks worn in the biochemical world, each one capable of healing or harm depending on its company. In the body, antioxidants patrol like gentle guards, neutralizing rogue oxygen forms before they cause too much damage. It is a battlefield made of breath and bond, and all of it is invisible. You close your eyes now, and in the dark you can almost see it. Molecules drifting above mountain tops, fracturing in sunlight, coming together again. Oxygen atoms finding each other, holding hands and breaking apart, not to hurt, not to destroy, but to keep the light at a distance just sharp enough to warm, never to burn. But not all protection comes from above. Oxygen, in its slow, silent hunger, leaves traces on Earth too. Traces that etch their way into bridges and apples, bones and clocks. What we call rust is a kind of remembering. What we call aging is oxygen, softly writing its name across time. And somewhere now, beneath city streets and behind sealed vaults, that same air curls into crevices, finds metal, and begins its patient task. Because oxidation too leaves fingerprints, and in the next breath, you will learn how oxygen slowly rewrites the world. Ask ChatGPT. You left the sky behind, that high cathedral of light where ozone dances between creation and sacrifice. Now your gaze lowers, softens, lands upon things closer to the ground, more ordinary, more human. A garden gate, a bicycle left in the rain, a set of keys forgotten on a windowsill. Each bears the quiet touch of time, the delicate fingerprint of air. Not the sudden blaze of fire, not the frostbite of cryogenics, but something slower, something persistent. This too is oxygen's work. Not to ignite, not to freeze, but to wait, to whisper against metal, wood, fruit, and stone until the very surface of the world begins to change. Rust. The word feels simple, but behind it lies a story of chemistry and patience, of oxygen's constant pull toward balance. You see it first on the iron gate, once black and strong, now webbed with ochre and orange veins flaking at the edges. What was once steel has begun its slow return to earth, and as happens not with fanfare, not with thunder, but with dew and air and time. Oxygen, even in its gentlest form, cannot help but reach. Every molecule longs for electrons. It waits, barely touching, until it finds a surface it can change. Iron, abundant and eager, gives itself easily. In the presence of moisture, especially salty or acidic water, the process begins. The iron oxidizes, forming iron 2, then iron 3, bonding with oxygen and hydrogen to create that familiar crust. Iron oxide. Rust. A slow alchemy written in red. It's happening now, all around you. In the hinges of doors, in the undercarriage of cars, in the bone of bridges. It is a kind of breathing. The metal breathes in water and air, and what it exhales is fragility, strength softened, edge dulled, time given texture. But it's not just iron. Copper turns green, silver turns black, aluminum whitens, brass grows dim. Each reacts with oxygen in its own dialect. These changes are not failures, they are signatures. Oxidation is not destruction, it is transformation. Tarnish is a memory of contact. Patina is history thickened into colour. Even fruit responds. Slice an apple and leave it out. Within minutes the pale flesh darkens, browned not by rot but by reaction. Enzymes inside the cells, exposed to air, begin to oxidize phenolic compounds. The colour changes, the texture follows. You could call it decay, but it is more accurate to call it transition. Nature has no interest in permanence. Everything breathes out and in, and within your own body oxidation is constant. Every heartbeat pumps blood rich with oxygen, and every cell uses it to make energy. But the same process releases byproducts, reactive oxygen species, that can damage proteins, lipids, DNA. It is the cost of being alive. You are burning at the slowest speed, and just as iron rusts and apples brown, you too bear oxygen's mark. Wrinkles, fading colour in hair, a gradual softening of tissue tone. You're not breaking down, you're being written upon. That's why antioxidants matter. Not as miracle cures, but as gentle correctors. They step in to balance the reaction, to temper the oxygen's hunger. Your body makes them. You eat them. They are vitamins and enzymes and compounds forged inside cells like shields. They don't stop time, but they slow the hands of the clock. Even architecture shows you this story. Walk past an old train track, and you'll see rust ribboning across the rails like time-lapse photography. Beneath bridges, massive steel joints turn reddish-orange, expanding slightly as they corrode. In large structures, this swelling can fracture concrete, weaken bolts, bend girders. Engineers study rust not with disdain, but with awe. They know that even the strongest designs must bow to oxygen's quiet persistence. And yet sometimes we welcome rust. The weathering steel known as corten is made to rust, on purpose. Its outer layer oxidizes just enough to form a seal that protects the metal beneath. It grows a skin. Architects use it to create sculptures that age beautifully, changing colour year by year like autumn leaves frozen in iron. What we once saw as flaw, we now call character. You begin to wonder, how many things in life follow this pattern? How many ideas must corrode a little to reveal their true form? How many beliefs soften over time? How many hearts open only after weathering a little air, a little water, a little waiting? Even language oxidizes. Words change meaning. Stories shift. People return to old truths wearing new clothes. And through it all, oxygen hums gently in the background, unseen, patient, eternal. Your thoughts settle now on a penny left on a windowsill. Its copper is darkened, its shine gone. But you don't see it as ruined. You see it as remembered. It has felt the world. It has breathed. And in that oxidation is evidence of contact. It has been, just like you. And just like the paper-thin layers of oxygen molecules you carry with every inhale, the world carries its own breath-marked skin. Oxidation tells the truth about time. It doesn't shout. It doesn't hurry. It simply reminds you that nothing is untouched by air. But even now the story is shifting again, because while slow oxidation leaves soft traces, sometimes oxygen acts quickly. Suddenly, not over years, but in minutes, not as rust, but as rage. When its balance within the body tips just slightly, when oxygen becomes too abundant, too reactive, it no longer writes, it tears. There is a kind of aging that happens too fast, a kind of fire that flickers not in flame, but in damage deep within. And somewhere inside you, the battle begins. Not in steel or stone, but in the tender machinery of your very cells, where oxygen must be both ally and adversary, held in rhythm by the wisdom of balance. Inside you, every second, 1,000 sparks go unnoticed. You are not a furnace, not quite, but you are a slow, simmering ember of life, gently turning oxygen into energy in ways far more intricate than fire ever could. Your cells are laboratories, each one humming with activity, powered by tiny engines called mitochondria, the powerhouses, as you may have heard. But their true magic lies not in how they burn fuel, but in how they keep the flame from becoming a wildfire. You inhale, and oxygen slips through you like music, into lungs, into blood, into the waiting arms of your cells. There, it takes its place at the final step in an ancient and elegant chain called cellular respiration. The food you've eaten, glucose, fats, proteins, is broken down piece by piece, stripped of electrons. These electrons are passed along a kind of molecular staircase called the electron transport chain, and oxygen waits at the bottom like a silent partner. It accepts the spent electrons, catches them, and with hydrogen becomes water. This water is not drunk, not sipped. It is made from breath, from flame, from life. But this staircase, like all precise machinery, has risks. Sometimes the electrons slip. They fall too early, and when they do, oxygen grabs them in an unfinished form. The result is not water. It is something unstable, a reactive oxygen species, a radical, a spark without a home. These rogue molecules roam, wild and charged. They bump into membranes, tear at DNA, warp proteins, like rust but faster, like fire but inside. This is oxidative stress, not a dramatic illness, not a headline, but a slow unraveling, cell by cell if left unchecked. The body knows this. It has known it for millennia. That's why it has protectors, enzymes like superoxide dismutase and catalase, compounds like glutathione and vitamin C and E. These are your internal firefighters, your elegant defense. They find the sparks and soothe them. They neutralize the radicals. They keep the balance. You might imagine these defenders as gardeners walking through the orchard of your body, trimming back the wildness before it grows too fierce, or as gentle librarians, preserving the clean lines of your genetic texts before they're smudged by reaction. Every breath brings more oxygen. Every breath carries the possibility of damage, and yet you survive, not in spite of this, but because of it. It is a tightrope. You must walk it. Too little oxygen, and the engines stall. You suffocate slowly. Too much, and they overheat. You burn invisibly. So your body walks the edge, balancing oxygen, modulating its reactions, crafting order from the wild chemistry of life. And sometimes the balance falters. Age shifts the equation. Stress, pollution, poor diet, or illness can tilt the scale, increasing the load of reactive oxygen species. The damage accrues. Skin shows at first, but beneath that, tissues begin to feel it. Inflammation rises. Organs tire. The wear and tear of decades is not merely time. It is chemistry, slow and relentless. Still, oxygen is not villain, nor is it saint. It is context. It is necessity. And strangely, the same radicals that aid you also signal your immune system, helping it respond to injury. They can even instruct your cells when to die, a process called apoptosis, a form of cellular self-sacrifice that keeps you healthy by removing damaged parts before they can become dangerous. Without this, cancer might bloom. In this way, oxygen is teacher and enforcer. It scolds gently, corrects errors, prunes the forest of your body to keep it from choking in its own overgrowth. And outside of you, it works the same. In plants, oxygen is both gift and limit. When they photosynthesize, they create glucose and oxygen, sunlight spun into fuel, but too much oxygen under too much light can cause photorespiration, a wasteful process where instead of fixing carbon, the plant accidentally burns energy. Even chloroplasts, the green heart of leaves, must walk the line. So you see, even in silence the story continues. Oxygen surrounds you, fills you, and listens for your breath. And within that breath, it waits to be used carefully, to be honoured. It asks not for gratitude, only for awareness. That with every inhale you receive both energy and responsibility. And isn't that the essence of being alive? To hold something powerful with reverence, to allow what sustains you to also humble you. Your life is not a flame. It is a slow and steady glow, and oxygen is the keeper of that glow. Your body, a lantern, your breath, the breeze that stokes it. You imagine now your cells, billions of them shimmering like fireflies in the dark, each one glowing with its own rhythm. And across them, antioxidants move like silent caretakers, catching sparks before they fall too far. You picture mitochondria not as machines, but as little suns, pulsing with heat and memory. Each one descended from ancient bacteria, long ago folded into our cells. Symbionts, partners, life fused with life, all because of oxygen. Even your brain, the hungriest of all, runs on this delicate chemistry. Though only 2% of your body's weight, it consumes 20% of your oxygen. Its neurons fire like stars, needing constant fuel, and yet they are most sensitive to imbalance. When oxidative stress builds here, the consequences are subtle but profound. Memory softens, focus flickers, emotion grows raw. Some researchers believe oxidative imbalance may play a role in degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. But the full picture is still forming. Science, like breath, unfolds moment by moment. And still you lie there, in your bed, with your breath slow and deep. You're aware now of the breath not only in your chest, but in your cells. You sense it not just as air, but as energy and motion, chemistry and balance. You are a story oxygen tells, line by line, spark by spark, and the ending is not yet written. Above you the stars wheel through the sky, and inside you, electrons leap from one molecule to the next, all of it quiet, all of it precise. You're not separate from the universe. You are a mirror of it. The same laws that sculpt galaxies shape your breath. The same balance that holds planets in orbit keeps your oxygen flowing, just enough to nourish, never enough to scorch. And somewhere deeper still, past the skin and the cells, where molecules begin to hum in rhythms more ancient than thought, the story of oxygen begins to whisper again, this time not in rust or breath, but in flame that burns with no fire, in light that flows without heat. Ask ChatGPT. You deep within you, past the pathways of rust, past the whisper of breath, and the balancing act of electrons, lies the most secret theatre of oxygen's performance. You're no longer walking through gardens of metal or strolling along molecular tightropes. You're descending into something finer now, something nearly invisible, a place where oxygen becomes light, where combustion becomes cold, and where fire loses its familiar roar. And yet the energy it unleashes is no less profound. You begin not in a furnace or a candle, but in a laboratory. A small vial trembles slightly on a silver plate. Inside it, oxygen bubbles like a pale ghost. The vial is clear, the room is silent, and yet the air around you changes. The scientist holds a wire dipped in alcohol and lowers it into the liquid. Nothing, then everything. A shimmer, a hiss, a flame not orange or red, but a pure, piercing blue. A flame so cold it seems impossible, yet it dances, silent and high. This is liquid oxygen, supercooled, condensed and dense with possibility. It does not ignite on its own. It does not burn in the way you know. But when offered fuel, even the lightest spark becomes thunder. That blue flame, elegant and soundless, carries energy far beyond its size. It is fire without warmth. It is combustion refined. And in this state, oxygen shows its most paradoxical form, a freezing liquid that fuels explosive heat. Held at minus 183 degrees Celsius, it is pale and ghostly, almost weightless in appearance, yet more potent than any ordinary flame. It oxidizes instantly. Even materials that resist combustion in air, aluminum, carbon, even powdered iron, become eager, even desperate to burn in liquid oxygen. This is not metaphor. This is chemistry at its most extreme. And here you remember again that oxygen does not burn. It enables, it empowers. Fire is the result of a partnership. Without fuel, it cannot act. Without heat, it cannot begin. But once invited, oxygen becomes the most devoted of companions, amplifying, accelerating, intensifying. This is why rockets rise on wings of fire and ice. In the engines of space-bound vessels, oxygen must be carried, because the vacuum beyond our planet offers no air. So engineers bring it as a liquid, chilled and pure, ready to meet its fuel in a chamber designed for fury. Here, fire is controlled. Here, flame becomes flight. And the exhaust of these engines, not smoke, not ash, but steam, pure water, oxygen and hydrogen reunified after their violent separation. Destruction becomes synthesis. Out of combustion comes creation. Inside you, it is the same. Your mitochondria are not so different from rocket engines. They burn fuel, they require oxygen, and they produce water. They just do it softly, molecule by molecule, flame without fire. You're not a rocket, but you are rising nonetheless, into dreams, into memory, into understanding. The paradox continues, that the element that cools can also heat, that what extinguishes flame at room temperature can sustain it at extremes. Scientists call this duality, reactivity dependent on state. But to you, it feels more poetic than precise. Liquid oxygen becomes a symbol of power hidden within stillness, of energy folded into silence, waiting to be awakened. You begin to sense how many times in life this is true, how many things appear cold but hold fire within, how many emotions are quiet on the surface but burn below, how even the most motionless moments may contain the potential for transformation. Oxygen does not need to shout. It only needs to be present, and it is always present,